Agora a gente vai ter um outro painel com o Yaron, onde ele vai falar um pouquinho sobre a moralidade do capitalismo. E aí a Maria Marte vai falar um pouquinho sobre todo o evento. E teremos uma última palestra do Tal. Então, gostaria de convidar o Yaron Brook para falar sobre a moralidade do capitalismo.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I was a little disturbed earlier to hear one of the panelists talk about capitalism, as if capitalism is just trade, or that capitalism is just any kind of market activity, in a sense that we've always been capitalists, and even the leftists are capitalists. So I think it's really, really important that we define our terms, because that's not what capitalism actually means. Trade existed from the beginning of time, and yet you can't say that from the beginning of time we've had capitalism. Leftists indeed engage in economic activity, but not all economic activity means capitalism. Indeed, capitalism doesn't relate necessarily to any specific type of economic activity. Capitalism is a much broader term, and in that sense, it is a modern phenomena. It has not existed from the beginning of time, and could not have existed from the beginning of time. Capitalism is a social, political, economic system. A system in which all property rights, all property is owned by individuals, and where the sole role of government is the protection of individual rights. So the sole role of government is the protection of property rights and other individual rights. That's all government does. So it's the complete separation of state from economics. The state doesn't get involved in economics. The state's job is to protect our lives, our property, our ability to use our mind, use our judgment in pursuit of our own personal happiness. That's it. So there's a lot of confusion in that sense about capitalism. And note that part of the definition of capitalism involves a state. So I think anarcho-capitalism is a contradiction in terms. You can't have anarchy and capitalism. Crony capitalism is a contradiction in terms. Cronyism is a feature of statism, not of capitalism. It should be cronyism, or just say statism. All statist governments are crony. I don't know, there are all kinds of something capitalism. None of them are reality. There's capitalism, which means freedom, which means real free market, the absence of regulations and controls and government involvement, and there's everything else. So I think it's important that we clearly define our terms and we clearly know what we're talking about. So why capitalism? Why is that the socioeconomic system that we should adopt? So, two aspects to this. One is, if you will, the practical. How is it done? Is it good? What does it do in terms of human life? And the other is it good? Is it just? Is it moral? So I want to focus on the second one, but I think I have to say something about the first, particularly given that I think the two are, in some ways, the same question. That is, I don't think there's a conflict between the practical and the moral. For Ayn Rand, the practical is the moral, and the moral is the practical. They don't contradict. So, is capitalism a system that has been, quote, good for mankind? Is this a system that has promoted human well-being? Well, you have to start by saying, it's never fully been tried. We've approached capitalism, but we've never quite attained a full separation of state from economics. We haven't completely gotten to the point where we have complete free markets. So whatever we judge, we're judging whatever aspects of capitalism or the extent to which capitalism has been applied. Now, people might jump in and say, wait a minute, you're sounding like the left because the left says communism's never really been applied, right? And that's true from their perspective, right? And I don't want to get into the debate about whether communism has ever been applied or not. But this is the point to keep in mind. To the extent socialism has been applied, to the extent countries adopt any part of socialism, to that extent, they fail. To the extent economies apply the principles of freedom, free markets, of capitalism, to that extent, they succeed. There's a continuum. The more socialist, the more you fail. The more capitalist, the more you succeed. So it's easy to extrapolate that if we actually got to pure capitalism, the likelihood is we'd succeed even more. And the history of countries that have adopted free markets is astounding. The evidence in favor of markets it's rare that in the social sciences you have so much evidence for something being good as there is with capitalism. 250 years ago, before there was any free markets, before there was protection of property rights, before there was any conception even of individual rights or government protecting individual rights, basically everybody was poor. A few aristocrats had a little bit more than everybody else, but everybody was poor. Certainly by our standards. And it's interesting that as soon as these ideas of individual rights come into being, as soon as governments start taking them seriously, as soon as protections of individual rights, from property rights to free speech to other rights, are introduced, at the same time, you start seeing massive increases in wealth, massive increases in human well-being, massive increases in life expectancy, massive increases in wealth creation, by every dimension of human well-being, by every material dimension of human well-being. Things get better quickly. This happened in Europe and the United States, and to some extent in Latin America, in the 19th century. As governments were instituted, and those governments started protecting rights, started protecting liberty and freedom, and people had the ability to go out there and create and produce without asking for permission, they flourished, they produced, they created, and we all got significantly richer. And that happens time and time and time again. No matter what the geography, no matter what the beginnings of the culture are, no matter where it is, it happens. You know, one of my favorite examples is Hong Kong. 75 years ago, a little fishing village with nothing there. Today, or at least until the communists took it over, or not the communists, but the fascists from China took it over in 2020, it had 7.5 million people in it, more skyscrapers than New York City, and a GDP per capita, which is a measure of individual wealth, higher than the United States of America, and it did that in 70 years. And what kind of political system did it have? Basically, free markets, too much government intervention, but as compared to any other country in the world, the freest economy in the world. You couldn't vote, but your freedom of speech was protected, property rights were protected, contract laws were protected, and they became super rich super quickly. In a place, and this must bewilder the leftists, in a place with zero natural resources. Zero geographic advantage. I don't know if you've ever been to Hong Kong, but it's a rock in the middle of nowhere. And you can see this everywhere. Everywhere it's applied. Capitalism, to the extent that it is tried, is a massive success from a wealth production, quality of life, standard of living perspective. And that is part of what makes it so bewildering, why people keep rejecting it. I mean, you have a neighbor not that far from here Do you share a border with Chile? You share a border? No. Argentina's in between, right? Yeah, so you don't quite share a border with it, but still close. By the standards of world geography, it's a neighbor. That embraced some principles of free markets. Not as much as we would like, but some. Pretty good. And they went from being the poorest country in Latin America to the richest country in Latin America within 2 generations. Happened very quickly. From the early 1980s until the early 2000s, from poorest to richest. Maybe that's only 1 generation. 1 generation. From the poorest to richest. And yet, they have no appreciation of that. They don't care. I mean, this whole idea that people are motivated by economics, Chile is proved wrong. If they were motivated by economics, they would continue this path. But they have done a U-turn. Now, they haven't done a complete U-turn, so there was a good vote on the Constitution. They got rid of that abomination. But they voted a socialist president in. A real socialist, not a pretend one. A real one. And there's clearly dissatisfaction in Chile with the fact that they became wealthier. Because it created, I don't know, inequality. Even though the poor got much richer over that period of time. The rich got richer even faster. And that's not good somehow. And it seems that over and over and again, we get the same thing. Of course, the United States is a great example of this. We became rich by being free. And every decade, we become less free. And we become less, in terms of economic growth at least, less growing. And nobody sees the connection between the two. We want more government and more regulation, more control and more redistribution of wealth. And the fact that we're giving up all this wealth, nobody seems to care. People are not driven by economic success. If they were, we would all be living in laissez-faire capitalist heaven right now. Because the evidence for capitalism's success is overwhelming. And this is why, one of the reasons I think the purely libertarian cause is doomed. Because all they have is economics. And nobody cares. Nobody cares about economics. If they did, we won. We've already had the greatest economist ever, Mises, right? Greatest economist who ever lived. We've had people who support our cause, Milton Friedman, who was a great educator. We've had Hayek, who was good on some things, not so good on others. We've had good economists. We've had great economists. We've had hundreds of economists. And again, the facts of reality, the actual existential facts, the reality out there is all in our favor. There are no counterexamples. There's no country in the world that adopted the principles of property rights and the protection of property rights and then became poorer. It's never happened. Even China. If you look at what happened in China, is they created pseudo-property rights. They pretended to protect them, or gave the people the impression they protect them. They allowed people to keep the product of their labor. They actually taxed it less than they tax you in Brazil and taxed us in America. And what happened? They got rich, or relatively speaking. But it's all a product of the same thing, the same principles. And even they are turning away from that. Now, I say even they, but there it's predictable. Because what happens when you increase economic freedom, what happens? People want more. And the Communist Party of China realized that if they continued on that path, they would lose control. So they've reversed path. And what happened to economic growth in China? It's gone way down. Way down. And economists will pretend that it's, you know, that's inevitable because economies slow down at some point and all this. They'll do anything to justify these things except admit that more controls lead to slower growth. They won't admit to that. So I don't know what more we can say to people to convince them that capitalism is good if our arguments are going to be economic. Then has already been said, then has already been evidenced. It's right there in front of their faces. If they just open their eyes, it's right there. but they don't want it. They're not interested. Because they know that capitalism is a slap in the face to something much more fundamental to them, and that is their ethics. Capitalism is a rejection of their moral code. Capitalism is a rejection of everything they believe about morality. And they're not willing to give up their morality. Certainly they're not willing to give up their morality without an alternative. People need morality. They need a guide to life. They need something to tell them what is right and what is wrong. And they're not willing to give that up. And they're willing to take a stand on their morality, even if it costs them real dollars, real money. People vote to increase their taxes all the time for moral guilt-ridden reasons. Right? So the case for capitalism has to be ultimately a case for an alternative morality. And capitalism rests on a morality that's an alternative to the common morality, an alternative to altruism, an alternative to the idea of self-sacrifice. That's why they hate it. That's why they always reject it. And that's why I think only objectivism can win, because only objectivism actually offers an alternative, which we talked about earlier in my talk. Right? So what is it about capitalism? What is the morality of capitalism? What's at the core of capitalism? What the core of capitalism is the idea that your life is yours. Your life is yours, and you are free to live. Capitalism allows you the freedom to live based on your judgment. Nobody's going to impose their judgment on you. And what does that do? What does that encourage people to do in their actual engagement in the marketplace? What do they actually pursue in the marketplace? Why do people go into the marketplace to trade? Real question. What do we trade? Yeah, to improve your own life. We go to trade to make our lives better. I buy the iPhone because the iPhone will make my life better. And I'm willing to give up $1,000 to do that because the iPhone is worth more than $1,000 to me. Apple goes into marketplace to sell the iPhone. Why? Because it's making a profit. It's trying to make money for its shareholders. It's making money, and my life is better off. Everybody's better off. But everybody in the marketplace is motivated by their own interests. And if we don't view your own interest as something good, then how can we view the marketplace as something good? If you view pursuing your own self-interest as evil, as bad, or as morally neutral, how can we get excited about capitalism? If it's bad, then capitalism is bad, and I think that is the argument the left has. Again, the opponents of capitalism have no economic argument. None. We've wiped them out economically. Our economists have answered every single question, every single challenge that the left, right, and middle have proposed against capitalism. There is no economic argument against capitalism. And believe me, I've done hundreds of thousands of Q&As and heard everything. And they're always the same questions. Well, what about monopolies? Or what about... We've got answers to every single one of them. And they're not hard answers. They're not like, you need a PhD in economics to get them. But it doesn't matter. Because what they hate about capitalism is not anything to do with economics. What they resent about capitalism is that it unleashes, is built on the idea of self-interest. The idea of people pursuing their self-interest, and that rewards self-interest and encourages self-interest, right? You make profits, you get bonuses, you make more profits, you get more bonuses. It's great, from my perspective, right? But it seems so self-interested, and of course they talk about a materialistic consumer culture. What's a materialistic consumer culture? It's you having nice shoes. and me having a nice iPhone. And it's all the things that we value in life, material things. And this is bad somehow? I mean, consumer culture is cool. I mean, I might not like what you guys buy. I might think it's wasteful or silly, or I don't appreciate shoes. Although I appreciate your shoes, maybe. I just don't appreciate them for me. But that's the beauty of it. You get to pursue your values, and I get to pursue mine. They're not in conflict. They're not at my expense. I'm winning because the system exists, and you're winning because the system exists. But you see, that's exactly what they don't like. So if we want to really combat the arguments against capitalism, we have to go beneath the economic arguments, or beyond the economic arguments, and challenge the philosophical arguments. And I would say there are two. One is the ethical argument, that capitalism is immoral because it encourages, facilitates self-interest, rewards self-interest, incentivizes self-interest. And I also think there's an epistemological argument, which we can deal with separately, or somebody can ask in the Q&A, but that is, and you're seeing this a lot from the right now. I'm reading a lot of the new right thinkers, and you see this argument a lot from the right. You guys just don't know how to take care of yourself. You're just not capable of it. You need guidance. You need good philosopher kings to guide you and help you. And the left holds this too, but the right is just more articulate about this right now. You need people, you need religion and religious leaders, or you need the state, or you need somebody to tell you exactly what kind of shoes you should wear. Or the fact that you're wearing too many shoes and maybe you should cut back on how many shoes you buy. You need somebody, because we're animals, and this is the principle. We're animals. We're animals, if you come from a Christian background, we're animals embedded with original sin. We're bad people, we're not very good. And we need institutions, we need force, we need coercion to restrict us from expressing our self-interested, monstrous nature. What are they rejecting? They're rejecting what I believe is the true human nature, which, granted, requires effort to live up to. But that's what we should be aspiring for. And true human nature is as a rational being, to quote Aristotle. We are the animal of reason. We can overcome whatever lusts exist out there. We can take care of ourselves. There's not some group of people that have a monopoly over the truth. There's no philosopher kings. This is Aristotle's rebuttal of Plato. Plato believed that only a few people have access to the truth. Well, if only a few people, if Plato's right, this is why I think philosophy is so important to the fight for liberty. If Plato is right, liberty is impossible. Because Plato says, you just live in a cave. You don't know what's good for you. You're just ignorant, blind people. You need the guidance of the people who can see the light, who are the guidance of the people who can see the truth. So we need dictators, we need authoritarians. It's for your own good to have them. And again, this is a story now that's always been true of the left, and now is true of the right as well. You're seeing it in the new right, more and more and more of this discussion about the need to guide the people, which means authoritarian philosopher kings. So it's inevitable, I think, that for a new system, and I think capitalism is a new system, freedom, the whole idea of liberty and free markets and property rights, these are new ideas. We need a new morality. We need a morality that defends the behavior that is encouraged and facilitated by freedom, which is egoism, which is people pursuing their own self-interest. Now, that's not why I think we should have a new morality. But if we're going to defend capitalism, this is the only way, I think, to defend it. And this is a way to combat the resistance we get. Unless we can convert, I truly believe that unless we can convert people away from conventional morality, we will never win. Our war is a philosophical cultural war. If we can win the philosophical cultural war, which means if we can win the battle for egoism and for reason, for rationality, then I think the political economic battle is relatively easy. If we can convince people, A, that their life is theirs and they have their moral responsibilities to themselves, to their own happiness, to their own well-being, to their own flourishing, and that they have the capacity to attain that through reason. And this is the ultimate defense of capitalism. Then what do they want? What do people who believe in themselves, who believe they have a mind that can identify reality, discover the truth, they believe that their own happiness is a standard, and that to pursue that standard, they need to be able to use their mind to guide themselves. What do they want? What do people like that want?
Freedom.
They want freedom. They want to be able to use their mind in order to choose their values and pursue those values. It's easy. And that's the ultimate defense of the non-initiation of force principle. Because what can stand in the way of me using my mind to choose my values and pursue them? What's the only thing at the end that can stand in the way of me using my mind to choose my values and act to pursue them? Force, coercion. It's the only thing that can stand between me and my values. And indeed, if I put a gun to your head, your values are irrelevant. If I put a gun to your head, your judgment is irrelevant. Your mind is irrelevant. Your thinking is irrelevant. Your reason is irrelevant. To survive, you do what I tell you. Coercion is anti-mind. Coercion is anti-reason. And coercion is anti-self. Coercion is anti-morality. It's anti your ability to pursue your life, to pursue your happiness. So capitalism is good because it leaves people to think for themselves and to act in pursuit of their own values, of their own life, of their own happiness. And people who want to pursue their own happiness, who trust their minds to do that, will demand capitalism. It won't be something we have to convince them of. They'll demand it because it's the only way they can attain their ultimate goal, which is their own personal happiness. But note that that's not true of altruism. It's not true of a Platonic world. It's not true if we undercut reason, and it's not true if we undercut the moral legitimacy of pursuing your own self-interest. So capitalism is the only system in human history that has actually worked. It's the only economic political system that has actually brought us prosperity and wealth and reduction in poverty and all those wonderful economic standard of living issues. Unsurprising, a system that works is also a system that's moral. It works because it has unleashed the human spirit. It's unleashed entrepreneurs. It's unleashed the human mind. It's unleashed all of our self-interested motivations and interests. It's unleashed human ingenuity by taking away the thing that restricts it, which is force. So if we want to win the battle for capitalism, we need to ground it on this new morality, on a morality of egoism. Thank you. I'm losing my voice. There's water. All right, we got time for questions, I think.
A gente vai ter 10 minutinhos aí para perguntas.
Hi, Yaron. There's this video where Ayn Rand answers why some people reject capitalism. And she suggests that behind their altruism, there might be some irrationally selfish motivation, right? Like they fear freedom, or they have they use altruism as a rationalization. So what percentage do you think of people are truly altruists? And how many people, are actually using altruism out of I don't know, fear, or oh, they just want to be popular and say, you know, I only care about people, and they have some negative selfish motivation, not selfish in our sense, but some negative, you know, irrationally selfish impulse behind their altruism.
Yeah, I'll just say I don't like the term irrational selfish. It's a contradiction in terms, because to be selfish, you have to be rational. So yes, we need kind of an alternative term to describe people that seem to be pursuing their self-interest, but are doing it in a completely irrational way. Look, how many people are truly altruistic, who live altruism all day long and are committed to it? Zero. Because they would be dead. Because it is such an inconsistent philosophy. It involves constant sacrifice. If you're constantly sacrificing, you're not doing anything to live, you're not going to be able to live. I mean, even, you know, maybe there's one or two Mother Teresas out there, but there are not that many Mother Teresas. Why are there not that many Mother Teresas? Because not many people are willing to give up their life. Almost everybody has some piece of their life where they want to pursue something that's theirs. Almost nobody's completely willing to give it up. But what altruism does, altruism is insidious, because what it does is, it's not that now in some cases, it causes people to do professions they might not have done otherwise. It causes people to do all kinds of things like, you know, listen to their, you know, choose a career based on what their parents want instead of what they want, to appease. So altruism and appeasement are very connected. But I think the main way in which altruism works is through guilt. So people, particularly businessmen, this is true of, they go out there and they make something of their life. They work hard and they build something and they use their mind and they create and they make a lot of money. But deep down, at some point, there's this little voice saying, oh, but this isn't right. You should be giving more. You should be sacrificing. You're too happy. You should be sacrificing. You should be giving up stuff. And that's the guilt. And as a consequence of that, they become big philanthropists. Even philanthropists, they don't even care about, they give stuff to things they don't really care about. They go and do community service. They go to soup kitchens. They do all kinds of stuff. They don't really, it's not their values, but they do it to reduce that little guilt thing. And it never goes away, right? J.P. Morgan, the famous American banker who was very wealthy, is famous to his dying breath trying to buy himself into heaven, trying to do anything he can, give it away, do favors to people, whatever he can, just to buy himself into heaven, because he knew he was going to hell because he'd been a capitalist his whole life and he'd been self-interested and he was rich. So he knew it, right? And I think they all do that. I was once at a Lifetime Achievement Awards like luncheon. This is in Charleston, South Carolina. So conservatives, these are not leftists, all conservatives. Successful businessmen who've done very great things in their work and everything. So they were getting this trophy or whatever, and they would have these long bios, right, to describe their lifetime achievement. And the long bio, they'd have like a paragraph about their business, and then they'd have 3, 4, 5 paragraphs about their community service and about their charity and about all this stuff. And they had me as the speaker, which was a big mistake. Because I got up and said, you should be ashamed of yourselves. Because what you should be proud of is the work you've done. What you should be proud of is the business you created, the values you've achieved, the people you employed, your family you took care of, the fact that your life means something through that business. You did some community service and charity, who cares? I literally said that. Because that doesn't change the world. Is anything being changed by a charity? But businessmen change the world every single day. But they can't hold that. They can't be proud of it because they have this tug of altruism behind them. Right? Or in California, there's a vote to raise taxes on the rich. And of course, it's always framed as if we don't raise taxes on the rich, then we're going to have to close down these schools. How do you think the rich vote on this? They all vote for it, to raise their own taxes, to reduce that guilt associated with the fact that they've accumulated the wealth. Now, the reason people adopt altruism is often psychological. And there are all kinds of psychologies that lead to it. It's sometimes a lack of self-esteem. It's sometimes just what they were taught and they had no option. They didn't think it through. But you always have to think about, if you read The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, her analysis of Ellsworth Toohey, and the fact that he adopted these ideas out of a hatred. So a lot of them hate. And I see a lot of these intellectuals who are leftist intellectuals, they just hate people. They hate mankind. They hate our success. They hate the fact that some people are prosperous. Some of them are just power lusters. They use altruism to achieve power. They use altruism to guilt you, to give them power. So there's a whole array of the way people use it. Ayn Rand dissects this in several of her essays around the different motivations different people have. But altruism is a great tool to control people. And that from a power perspective, if I can make you feel guilty for your own survival, for your own thriving, for your own successes, I can manipulate you now. I can get you to do the things I want you to do. So it's a great way to have power over others. It's one of the reasons it has to go, right? Because it's unbelievably destructive.
I understand that someone like Bill Gates, they might feel guilty because they're so successful.
See, I don't even think Bill Gates feels guilty. I think Bill Gates believes he should feel guilty. Okay. Because he's very intellectual. He's a smart guy. And he knows he should. He read all the books. He read John Rawls. He's known to have read John Rawls. And if you listen to him, he almost literally quotes John Rawls. And he knows he should feel guilty. So he does things, even though I don't think he does feel, because when you see him talk about business, he lights up. When he talks about philanthropy, But he lights up when he talks about business because he loves it. Mm-hmm. It's his passion. And so, but he knows there's something wrong with that. He's been taught, his parents are very leftist in that sense, or very altruistic, and they've embedded that in him.
But in terms of everyday people, in the streets who are not successful and they adopt, I see much more of what you said about that Toohey and those motivations. So in terms of communicating, do you think it's
I don't think that many people who have the Toohey motivation. The hatred, you find the hatred on the nihilist left and the nihilist right. You don't find it in everyday people. Everyday people have adopted altruism because it's all they know. Everyday people have adopted altruism because they want morality and nobody's ever offered them an alternative. And it's the church, it's the secular teachers, it's their parents. Who are they to challenge all these people? They're not intellectuals, they're not philosophers, they're not thinkers, and they've never encountered an alternative. And as I said, human beings need guidance. We need a sense of what's right and what's wrong, right? We need, philosophers have a role, and the philosophers dominantly are all altruists. So they adopt it because what else is there? I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I was 16, so I was probably more intellectual than most. Sorry, this is so long. And I was thinking, I thought to myself, okay, morality tells me I have to sacrifice to other people. And in this case, I was living in Israel, and the idea was I had to sacrifice for the Jewish people, I had to sacrifice for the state. I was really bought into this, right? I was waiting for the grenade to come so I could dive on it and die for the state, because that's how inculcated we were with this nationalist nonsense. And I remember thinking to myself, why does this make sense? Why should I sacrifice to other people? And my answer, this is before I read Rand, of course, my answer was, well, what else is there? I mean, I couldn't conceive of any other way to have a morality, because everything I'd ever been taught, everything I've ever heard, was morality equals this, morality equals sacrificing to others. And Rand blew my mind, literally. It was a literal explosion out there in my room, because wow, she offered me an alternative. And an alternative that made a huge amount of sense and gave me license suddenly to live my life for me. And that was a revolution in my mind, and I think it would be a revolution in a lot of minds if we could access them.
We only have time for one more short question and one short answer.
I don't do short answers. Yeah.
There's an argument for the morality of capitalism, which will blow your mind, which only works in Portuguese. Because you guys use the word net equity for capital. And in Brazil, a balance sheet will show social capital. Now, Why would a capitalist instrument of what you call it, results have the word social capital? Yep. Why? Because we capitalists apport $200 million to the company, and it's not more ours. It is not ours. It belongs to the society for guaranteeing wages, guaranteeing our suppliers and everything. So that's amazing. And I have to go to the stock market, but I cannot get my money back from the company. I have to go to the stock market and get another fool to keep guaranteeing.
No, that's great that at least in Brazil, you say it, right? Everybody else assumes the same thing. But here, it's right there on the balance sheet. But the idea that wealth, profit, capital is social is everywhere. And you see it, the illustration of this is that people think, I mean, most economists, when you ask them what's economics about, what's the issue that economics deals with, it's how do you distribute wealth? Who gets what? That's the question. Not how you produce it. How do you distribute it? And the assumption there is it's social. There's a social pie, right? They always use the pie. And you get a big piece of the pie, and they get a small piece of the pie, and is that fair? And it is not. But they view it as a pie, a social pie. But it's not. As I like to say, you bake the pie, and I bake the pie, and they bake the pie, and you don't get to aggregate that and turn it into a social pie. So yes, there's this collectivistic notion that is embedded in our culture that all wealth and capital is social. And there's really no property rights. And remember, maybe the most famous speech to illustrate this was President Obama, my favorite President Obama speech ever. The most evil speech, one of the most evil that any president has ever given, was the "You didn't build that" speech. You remember that? You didn't build that. It's, we paved, the government paved the roads, and you had a great school teacher, and she deserves some of it. And, everybody else, you had employees. And forget about the fact that he paid the employees. Forget about the fact that it's only taxes from him that paved for the roads. You didn't build that. It's not, you don't, and it goes back to John Rawls. And just back to our libertarian conversation. There are libertarians who try to justify their libertarianism on John Rawls. I know, but, tell that to John Tomasi, right? But they do, and what does John Rawls say? You didn't build it. It's your genes. It's your environment. You don't have free will. There's no free will. If there's no free will, then all the discussion is irrelevant. Forget about it. You might as well have socialism. What difference does it make, right? So, they find any excuse to take away individuality, to take away ownership, to take away desert, the fact that you deserve something. They want everything wiped out, so we're just automatons, guided by the philosopher kings who tell us how to live. And they get to divide the pie based on their infinite wisdom. Thank you. Or I should say, obrigado.